Kubernetes for Humans.
Welcome to the first episode of Kubernetes for Humans. I'm genuinely excited about this podcast. The goal of this podcast is to showcase real Kubernetes adoption stories, including the good, bad, and ugly. And I think everyone who tried pushing a new technology knows how ugly it can get. Most of our guests are seasoned platform engineers who have the scars to prove it, but we also feature interviews with industry leaders in our domain. Hope you'll enjoy. And today we have a very special guest on the show. We have Christoph. Christoph, let's start by introducing yourself.
So hello, nice to meet you. Very happy to be here. Christoph Held. So I'm working here in Munich at Allianz as a cloud architect. And maybe a little bit of the background. I started almost 10 years ago at a company. The name was Fujitsu. We were in an innovation hub when we were looking at ways to deploy software on servers. Yeah, and of course we were using LXC back then. And then shortly after it was uploaded, we switched to Docker, and then it was clear we're waiting for an orchestrator. And when actually Kubernetes was announced, we kind of started to invest, started to jump on the board. And actually I became a full-time contributor. Actually, we started the Kubernetes dashboard, some other projects. Also, we supported like installer and other things inside Kubernetes. And I was quite deep involved in the community for a long time, and eventually switched over to consulting and landed at Allianz now. Yeah.
Sounds cool. So let's talk a bit about history. We are like in the Kubernetes, not ancient history, but we are in the Kubernetes space for 7 years, right? Something like that. Really kind of out of the start. Did you had any thought about choosing something else back then? Docker Swarm was quite popular for a time. Mesos was also quite popular. So just share with me in the beginning, why did you chose Kubernetes, and also a bit about the community back then, if you see any difference between now and then.
Mm-hmm. So when we started, actually what existed before Kubernetes was Mesosphere, I think, yeah?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, it didn't really fit what we expected to be used for customers, yeah? So it wasn't really an option. And Docker Swarm, I think, was introduced later, and also not really something like an enterprise product back then.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, there never was really a kind of consideration of other tools. It was pretty clear that Kubernetes is the right tool, right? And the idea, of course, was back then to have a hybrid cloud solution for customers, yeah? So to use our on-premise data centers, but also in our Fujitsu cloud, which still existed back then. Community, it was really a nice time, crazy time. It's very fast-paced. It's really a lot happening, and I think it's even more crazy right now. Often you create pull requests, and once you want to merge, the code is, the class already has been refactored, it's gone, and you have to redo it, and so on. It's really fast-moving, and it's really hard to follow all the trends at the same time. Yeah. But it was a really interesting, lots of learning opportunities, really, really interesting time to have this kind of experience. So I really highly recommend everyone to, if you have a chance to get involved in a large open scale project.
Yeah, I think not only it's a large scale and really moving fast, but everything you do really has a direct impact on a lot of users. You worked on the Kubernetes dashboard, right? I think everyone in some stage of their Kubernetes journey played with the Kubernetes dashboard. So if you can share maybe the motivation, the hard things, I think today it is less popular. Maybe you can correct me. But yeah, share about how did it start and how was it working on something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I think it played its role, right, and it has its impact, and it's the main motivation back then was for an enterprise product. We thought you need a kind of dashboard, you need kind of interface. It's hard to imagine, especially if you think of back then really traditional, rather administrators, probably going over into more DevOps role, right? And it was hard to imagine that they would, accept an enterprise product that has no interface yet, dashboard. So that was the main reason why we started this project. About 80, I would say 70% of the contribution were from my team, and the other 20 was Google and a little bit of community. We started, of course, before Kubernetes 1.0 release, if I remember correctly. I think so. Yeah. So there were quite a challenges. So, for example, there was no API from Kubernetes really. So I think in the beginning we used kubectl as a kind of interface. Let's call it the API replacement, because there was a lot of logic actually in kubectl, and still for a long time.
Yeah, it still has a lot of logic, I will say.
Okay. Yeah, I thought so. I think it's because Kubernetes, they really kind of stick to this kind of REST paradigm, which makes putting logic in the server hard at some point. It's more like end user related logic, and I could imagine even today with like error messages and these kind of things, or states or so of resources, probably still a little bit tricky to work with API alone, and you might have to, what you get is maybe not what users expect, and you might have to re-implement some of the kubectl logic. Yeah.
I can share that like internally we are like sometimes really copying the kubectl like logic, product, because it has much more complexity than you can imagine. Like any like decent CLI, like you don't expect it. Basically, you do kubectl describe. I was always sure that, for example, it is like one clear REST call and that's it. And it's like 5 different REST calls combined, and it has its own internal logic. So for anyone who didn't really develop like Kubernetes tools, I will say kubectl is surprisingly complex, but it gives you a really good feeling as a user. By the way, like all complexity is like really, really like not shown to the end user.
So, I mean, what we always wanted, of course, was to have some more advanced debugging capabilities and drill down capabilities to find like the root cause and so on, some monitoring capabilities inside the tool. Of course, and we implement some bit of it, but we never really get that far that we would like it to have been, of course, yeah. And today, I think there's simply better performance out there. To be honest, I think that's why you simply don't need it anymore. You have the cloud providers, native user interfaces. You have a lot of professional tooling out around there, and I guess simply there's not much need for such an open source project anymore, I guess. And that's, I guess, why it's a little bit less popular. Yeah. But actually, we have quite a few downloads, so it was used quite a bit for a couple of years.
Yeah, like when I started like the Kubernetes journey, like 6 years ago, 6 years ago, like it was the first thing that I downloaded, right? Like, and then K9S came, and like a lot of people moved right to K9S because like everyone is like a CLI people, right? All of the hard. So I think back then there were no options. Now there are like this space is becoming more crowded. Commodore also has like a support of all of those functionalities, and I think both like LAMP and K9S are quite popular tools in this space of like showing everything happens in Kubernetes. But let me take you to something you said. In the beginning, like enterprise adoption for a tool that doesn't have any UI, right? Like this was that one of the motivations that make you start basically the dashboard. How do you see like enterprise adoption now, right? Like you're a consultant, you said you saw like a lot of trends and like companies trying to adopt Kubernetes. So what's your take about the current state of Kubernetes adoption? If I'm an enterprise, or maybe if I'm like a young cool startup, like what do you see as like the biggest trends or obstacle that prevent people from really adopting Kubernetes?
I think today, enterprises typically have tons of applications, unbelievable amount of applications, yeah. And I guess a lot of enterprises still, they're kind of, today they're fully kind of cloud oriented and have a cloud first approach, but because they have so many applications, often still the majority of applications, I would say, still is on-prem and not really in the cloud. I guess still true for many enterprises, yeah. And but Kubernetes, most companies I've seen typically have created a little bit of a custom Kubernetes flavor with some default tooling and security setup. And some companies also work in regulated environments like BaFin and so on, and they have to prove some measures and so on. That's why usually they have some kind of basic set of predefined configurations, let's say of Kubernetes or other resources, where they kind of can prove then to BaFin that they're following these kind of processes. And typically, I would say most enterprises have rather large clusters where they bundle applications, because actually it's quite a bit of effort to run a Kubernetes cluster. Yeah. And I'm not really sure if I like this kind of concept of putting multiple applications that more or less belong together in the same cluster. I would rather like to have it like more separated. But that's how most applications are doing, and most enterprises are doing it, I would say, today. And I think what I see is typically in the beginning often. So my gut feeling is that in the beginning, a lot of teams are very feature eager. They want to include everything like Istio and so on, and Kubernetes, and try to utilize as much or implement as much features as possible. And my feeling is like it starts a little bit to shift again into, okay, what is really needed and how can we make it easy enough for the operation teams and make it stable enough. I think there's a little bit of a learning into making it simpler again and more stable operations. Focus a little bit more on the operations.
What do you think? Like you mentioned Istio, and I think that this is like like a hot topic for the last 4 years. Do we need it? We don't need it. Like, what's your take about both like service mesh in general, Istio in particular, and like what are the must-have tools inside Kubernetes? Like, if I'm
Of course, Istio is of course neat. There's some other service mesh as well. I'm not sure if it matters so much. So what most enterprises use, and what I've seen at least in the enterprise space, is they use the TLS encryption inside the Kubernetes cluster, and several companies have also requirements for that. And this is something that really, I would say, is what everyone is using. Yeah, most teams are using. Beyond that, I have not seen so much use of features, of Istio features that are used within enterprises. Yeah. I could imagine that if you start up with a cloud-native startup like, I don't know, Zalando or whatever, that has a lot of microservice and that has a cloud-native business, that a lot of these features are attractive, like fine-grained rollout and so on. But enterprise, I simply don't see this kind of demand, actually, right? They typically just roll out and that's it, yeah. And if something is wrong, they roll back. Because it's not their main business, these kind of applications, right? They're not so super critical to take this kind of level of cautiousness and yeah. So the only concern I would say for most people, I would say Istio has too many features for this.
It's like a beast, right? Like for example, you want like a TLS encryption or something like that inside the cluster. Bringing Istio only for that is like, killing like a cockroach cannon, whatever. But yeah,
maybe all the teams have to adapt a little bit. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they eventually start to use it over time. I don't know, but so far I've never really seen that. Yeah?
Well, no, like what we see is pretty much similar. Like, but I'm always happy to learn from other people. I think that the teams that use Istio the most is more around like a cross-cluster traffic. routing is like maybe the biggest like usage I see, like a professional usage. But I think that because a lot of the eBPF tools that are starting to emerge, then maybe it, like you don't really need Istio for that, right? Like if all you need is the network layer. Do you see, by the way, like on the enterprise front, like eBPF or network drivers that has like what do you see? Like I already see more adoption, but it's still quite early. But maybe on the enterprise, things look a bit different.
So eBPF is this kind of native Linux and plugin mechanism where you can program the network layer a little bit more inside the kernel and don't need a proxy. So which potentially is one problem less, yeah. If you have to manage cluster upgrades and so on, maybe potentially, yeah, I could imagine that if you get rid of this, every running piece, less is better, yeah. And actually, what this was, the initial design of Kubernetes was to get rid of all proxies. There was a big refactoring to get rid of the kube proxy. Yeah, it's still called kube proxy, but it's not a proxy anymore. So I think not running proxies is a good thing in general. From enterprise users so far, I think, to be honest, I have not seen that that there was much adoption or they care so much about how they do an overlay or service mesh or how they do this kind of topics. It's yeah. I think the reason probably is why at this point, at least, I think they well. So from an architecture point of view, I really like this kind of eBPF idea, right? And reduce moving parts and so on, and performance improvement and so on. But from enterprise, they go more like straightforward and took like what features do you get and so on, and kind of easy ways, and then they simply choose Istio and that's it. Yeah, they don't think so much about architecture and so on. Yeah.
Andrew, I understand. Like another trend that at least we're seeing, and I'll be happy to hear from you, is around like platform teams that are emerging, and like we have a lot of like platform engineers in the podcast that talking about their experiencing. Do you see it as like something new? Do you see platform engineers? Like, what's your take on the role and the real like like what does it really mean, or do companies really need like a dedicated team to build this like internal platform for their team? Like, what's your take here?
Interesting question. Yes, I see almost every enterprise these kind of platform teams, yeah. And in most cases, they kind of, again, create this kind of a little bit predefined flavors of resources for DevOps teams to consume. So fundamentally, I would say so I like DevOps teams, okay? But for a DevOps team to work, the complexity of the underlying infrastructure must not be too complex. Otherwise, it will break apart, right? So you kind of get micro silos inside your DevOps team that's then kind of the room. You're back to start, yeah. So here it can help, right? So to reduce complexity and I think what I would like, I've done once or twice for companies, for enterprises, was to kind of use Kubernetes, but it's really rare exception. That use Kubernetes more like the initial idea the initial idea of kind of, if you look at Borg, Borg is a kind of the absolutely root automation layer at Google, right? They really automate the infrastructure, and Kubernetes is kind of a kind of a clone of that concept, of course, and a lot of the architecture you can use, right, is much better, or much going beyond just running containers. And I really like this typically to use Kubernetes as a kind of enterprise infrastructure automation layer. Yeah. And I did this one or twice for enterprises. really, let's say, extending the Kubernetes or using the Kubernetes APIs to automate some basic infrastructure. Yeah. Can help. Can be quite neat solution, but it's usually not done. I would say I still don't see this very often to happen. Yeah.
It's like the Kelsey hideout word for everything. Why? The Kelsey hideout tweeted once that
No.
Kubernetes is a platform for building platforms, so it's not the end game; it's just the beginning.
Yes, I really like using Kubernetes as kind of really as kind of like a REST server for Golang applications, if you like, right? Like a JBoss or something.
JBoss.
Yeah, like JBoss is for Java, like consider Kubernetes for Golang, if you like, yeah. And especially for building. Every enterprise has some basic automation needs, yeah. For example, they might have some legacy systems which are run with SOA, and you might need to enable some routing before you can talk with them. And this kind of basic, and you can get away with that. Probably to have like a Kubernetes API for this, I would say is probably a neat thing. And then, which is run by a platform team, and then you have DevOps team that can consume it somehow with Terraform or with Kubernetes API, whatever. I think this makes a lot of sense and should be embraced more often, but it's not happening that much.
Yeah. Why do you think? Like, why doesn't it happen more? Like, because it's hard to get to the state where everything is that simple, or companies don't understand that it's important?
So I think just companies So I think Kubernetes did an incredible job in marketing and teaching people to think it's a kind of platform to run containers, and they don't really see the kind of architecture concept behind it, and that's why they just don't consider it for this kind of use case, because it's never advertised for it, I would say. Yeah, it's simply not explained in this way, and that's why people don't use it usually. Yeah, with a few exceptions.
Okay. No.
So maybe one thing. So I don't know. Let's.
What? Hey, Christoph. Like now I need three.
Okay. I don't know. So I would just say at Allianz we're building a little bit of a kind of infrastructure platform using Kubernetes. A little bit in this way. So we have basic APIs, and they are run inside Kubernetes cluster, and you can use Kubernetes as a kind of, or this Kubernetes API extensions to automate your infrastructure needs, or some of your infrastructure needs, basic services we need. So here at Allianz, we're actually doing it this way. Yeah.
No, yeah. Well, they have you. Like you have also like the, I guess you're like helping them move to the direction that that you believe is good. I think most companies don't have a lot of like Kubernetes architect expertise or like mindset, right? Like I think most of them are more like, we need to start using Kubernetes because everyone is using Kubernetes, and we don't have really like the manpower or expertise or whatever. And that's make it really hard to think in advance, like, right, like what's the best way to architect everything? Because I think there isn't a lot of like deep knowledge around what's the best way to build like application on Kubernetes. Like you mentioned, like JBoss, right? Like JBoss exists for, I don't know, I want to say 20 years, but maybe I'm wrong. But like it has not only that it's like battle tested, but it exists for quite a lot of time, right? 2006. So yeah, around like 20. It was acquired on 2006. Yeah. So like it has a lot of like depth, and Kubernetes is like, both it's quite new, right? And also it changed really rapidly. Like we're still seeing like breaking changes and API changes and things like that. And it's hard to write like the best practices and the best infra when the floor is like keep on changing. And I think, most companies, like they are not there yet in their adoption, or at least that's what we're seeing. They're not there yet in the adoption both in terms of like the technology and the manpower and experience, basically. So this is like
It's there's so many use cases, right? And it's maybe hard to give a kind of generic answer to what is like the best practices Kubernetes, because it really depends so much on a use case. And you have clusters on-premise, you have clusters in the cloud, you have batch jobs that are running inside the cluster, you have maybe want to use Kubernetes as a kind of infrastructure platform to automate APIs, right? And so on. There are very wide range of use cases. Yeah, I think this also probably makes it hard. Yeah.
well, I agree. That
What about from general advices like treat your Kubernetes resources like cattle and not like pets? Do you agree with the statement? And what does it even mean to you?
Cattle and what?
So asking.
this is
Sorry, I could not understand it audio-wise.
Oh, sorry. What I'm saying is, what about some like general advice that people are using, like treat your Kubernetes resources as cattle, not as pets? What do you think about those? Do you have any advice like that? What does it even mean to you to treat your resources like cattle?
Cattle and pets.
Rather than pets.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Now I get it. I think. Yes. In general. So I was, I don't know. I was using Kubernetes from the beginning, and therefore somehow I still hesitate. I know you can do it, right? You can run stateful applications inside Kubernetes. I still hesitate, to be honest. Yeah, I still hesitate a little bit and say, well, yes, of course it's possible, and you can do this. Yeah. But it would not be my first choice, to be honest. I really would rather go and only put the stateless applications inside Kubernetes and put, especially if stateful, probably the managed services in the cloud and use them. Yeah. If you really have to run it, yeah, I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, it's possible. Of course, you can do it, and it's getting better, of course, all the time. You have more options, but yeah, I don't know. It's often underestimated, right? People think if you take like a stateful application, put it to Kubernetes, and every problem is solved, but it's often not the case, right? A lot of things often get also somehow more difficult. Yeah, some things get easier, but also other things like the debugging maybe get more complicated.
Yeah, state is hard, right? Like I think people underestimate like how hard it is both to keep like a stateful, like persistent over time, and also once you have problems, how do I detect them? How do I do like a rollback? Like there's a reason why like S3 and RDS and like all of those are so popular, right? Like as SQS, they are really good. Like they're like exceptionally good compared to everything you can achieve today. In Kubernetes, like I don't think you are even close to the SLA and SLO basically of like those kind of tools. We don't have a lot of time. Like I'll be happy to hear what do you see like in the future have in store for Kubernetes. Like what are the, I don't know, like if it's the trends or adoption or like movement, or like where do you think we will be like in 5 years from now as a community? Technology standpoint, like I promise, like I won't check it in 5 years. Let's see.
So what I've seen lately is complaints about stability in the media. I see some articles where they said, oh, maybe it's getting too complicated and so on. So I think Kubernetes should focus a bit more on stability and simplicity. Yeah. And probably, I mean, the super trend is ChatGPT, of course, right? And probably to have, I guess we see a lot of products that integrate, for example, for debugging. I guess it's probably, there's some new tools where we see like, I think for DevOps tools, maybe, right? Where you have probably some automatic, let's say, proposals how to fix a problem, these kind of tools. I think there we see some new tooling coming up. Yeah. yeah, in general, I think I guess it's more about simplicity, right, than adding much more features. I can't imagine that we need the extremely long amount of features in Kubernetes. Still, I think improving the cloud integration is important, and making it very easy for teams to run it without much interference, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I agree. Like one more thing that we see, and I'll be like really happy to hear what you think, is like dev and like Kubernetes. Like Kubernetes is complex, right? Like developers are usually not like a Kubernetes experts, and we see more adoption of like trying to push developers to use Kubernetes more on one hand, but there is like the complexity of Kubernetes on the other hand. Like, where do you see like developers and Kubernetes? Like, do they need to know Kubernetes? Do they need to be expert in Kubernetes? Like, what's your take on that?
You cannot hide complexity. I think you have to understand. Yeah, and you either have a team dedicated for Kubernetes, yeah, and if you cannot afford this, yeah, I don't know. Then you should. I don't know, if you really cannot afford a team that really understands in-depth Kubernetes, I would suggest you maybe think about having like a more managed solution, like a Fargate, right, or a GKE Autopilot or Cloud Run. Have like a more managed solution for you. Maybe it's a better idea. Yeah, if you really have the time and resources to leverage all the functionality and understand it in depth, then Kubernetes, of course, is a good choice. Yeah.
Yeah. So, any last words or like thoughts? Industry, Kubernetes, and enterprises, like
last words. Okay. I don't know. So it was interesting talking to you. Yeah. Greetings to Tel Aviv. It was very nice, interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I think Kubernetes will stay around, right? Will not go away. Containers will not go away. We will see still a lot of adoption. I think most load workload is still on-prem, and the future will be very interesting with AI. Yeah, how this evolves together with containers. How people will use AI to generate Terraform or Helm charts and so on. How the infrastructure maybe integrate with AI for debugging. I think this will be really interesting times in the next years. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. I had like a lot of fun talking with you, and good luck in Munich.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye.